Welcome to episode 31 of From A to Global Z and part 4 of our mini-series, Go Your Own Way, Why Bands Break Up. I'm your host, Dr. Bill Lord. In episode 30, we explored why household name musicians chose to leave highly successful, money-making, award-winning bands in order to try their hand at flying solo. Episode 31 will be our final foray into this mini-series dedicated to exploring the many and varied reasons why bands break up. Actually, this is a case of where the band broke up, then got back together, then broke up, then split into a couple of bands under the same band name. It's really a mess, and honestly, it's a sad and sordid tale. It's really a total nightmare. From an exploratory perspective, we will delve into a single tragic case study that has important lessons about surrounding yourselves with the right people. I'm talking about the heartbreaking saga of the 1970s platinum rock band Badfinger. Of course, a From A to Global Z episode would not be complete without Mic Talk time, and today we have a real beauty for you. It is Austrian Audio's 0616, a large diaphragm condenser microphone. You may not be familiar with Austrian Audio. They're a relatively new player on the scene. Well, let me walk that back a little bit. The company is relatively new, but the people that make up Austrian Audio used to design and manufacture highly respected mics for a large, prominent mic company for many years. And they really know what they're doing. And these folks have broken out on their own and created Austrian Audio. The OC16 is a cardioid pattern mic designed and engineered in Vienna. Nice. And it features a handmade ceramic capsule, which is fairly unusual. It is promoted as versatile. Austrian Audio declares the mic can be used to record vocals, acoustic guitar, piano, drums, strings, woodwinds, brass, room capture, and more. You get the picture. The OC16 ships with a nice padded fabric case and includes a quick clip mic as well as a shock mount for about $400 USD. Austrian Audio is quickly making a name for itself, and I mean that in a very good way. The reputation is skyrocketing, and there's a lot of love for the gear they produce, so give the OC16 a listen and see what you think. Now on with our show. The boys of Badfinger called the mountain lands of Wales home. Pete Ham provided vocals and guitar. Joey Molland also played guitar, Tom Evans on bass, and Mike Gibbons sat behind the drums. For those of you not familiar with Badfinger, it is estimated they have sold more than 14 million records. Not too shabby. And yet, rarely did they have enough money to pay their daily bills. How could this be? Well, that's why I want to feature their story, as it is a tale of caution for any musician who aspires to hit the big time. The band got its start in 1961 with Ham at the helm of a rock foursome called the Ivies. In 1965, Mike Gibbons joined Ham on drums. By now, the Ivies had made quite a name for themselves as a pop rock cover band and were opening for renowned rockers such as The Who, the Moody Blues, and the Yardbirds. Pretty impressive. And by 1966, they started to attract interest from some record labels, and by the end of the year, secured a 5-year recording contract. In 1967, the band asked their current bass player to depart, and Tom Evans joined them on bass. Now, back around this time, there was a little rock band from Liverpool called the Beatles. You might know them. And they decided to diversify their holdings and formed Apple Records. And the idea behind Apple was lovely. They were designed not only to be a creative outlet for the Fab Four, but it was also designed to give unrecognized talent a platform from which to be seen. A cornerstone of the model is only the members of the Beatles could sign a fledgling artist, and by doing so, whatever Beatles signed the artist would be the one to mentor them and show them the ropes to commercial success. As the story goes, somehow one of the Beatles' roadies, Mal Evans, saw the Ivies perform and liked what he heard. He carried their demo tape to the Beatles, and Paul really liked what he heard. And in '68, the Ivies were signed to Apple Records. In '68 and '69, they experienced limited global success with several original songs, but the best they could do in the US was chart at number 67 with Maybe Tomorrow. Meanwhile, Apple Records was experiencing challenges of its own. Essentially, John, Paul, George, and Ringo were all supposed to play an active role in running the company, but the reality was far from the agreed intent. As a result, artists were just standing around not being assisted, and the management system was in a complete mess. But that is an entirely different story. Point being, no one was promoting the Ivies. Without proper promotion, the boys were not getting any press, and without any press, there were no sales. No sales means no salaries. Eventually, the band complained loud enough, and Paul McCartney came to the rescue. Paul wrote this song called Come and Get It, which the Ivies really liked. However, there was a bit of a rub. The band wanted to interpret the song their way, and Paul said no dice. In order to be a hit, the song had to be recorded exactly Paul's way. As it turns out, Paul knew what he was talking about. Come and Get It was released in December 1969, and it sold 1 million copies worldwide, reaching number 7 on the US Billboard charts and number 7 in the UK. Their first album hit number 55 in the US. The second album, No Dice, was released in 1970, and it peaked to number 28 on the Billboard charts. The album included the band's second big hit, No Matter What, which peaked at number 8 in the US and number 5 in the UK. Ham partnered with Mal Evans to write Without You, which eventually was recorded by Harry Nilsson. Nilsson's version of the song became a number 1 international hit and won Song of the Year. So far, so good, eh? Well, don't get too comfortable. Enter new business manager Stan Polly. Polly signed Badfinger to a business management contract in November 1970. The legal system he put in place controlled the routing of income from any band touring, recording, publishing, and even songwriting royalties. They were all routed into holdings controlled by guess who? Stan Polly. The system was set up such that the band received a paltry salary, barely enough to make a living. And for instance, between 1970 and 1971, Ham made less than $6,000, while during this same period, Polly was paid over $75,000. That is over 10 times more than the band's frontman and principal songwriter. In addition to the recording and touring, they were respected enough as musicians to be quite active as session musicians, and the lads played on major recording projects for George, Ringo, and John. They recorded their third album, Straight Up, in 1971. The album, which was originally produced by George, eventually was taken over by Todd Rundgren, and it generated sizable hits, Day After Day, which made it to number 4 on Billboard, and Baby Blue was able to hit number 14 in the US. Again, the album sold over 1 million copies and reached number 31. As bad fortune would have it, with Alan Klein at the helm of Apple Records now, in 1972, the label began to unravel. The band was told by Polly that they were going to need to cut their royalty rate and pay for their own studio time. Polly began to be suspected of mismanaging Badfinger and his other musician clients, and rumors surfaced that he had ties to the mafia. Badfinger needed to find new label, and Polly signed the boys to a brutal deal with Warner Brothers that required the band to generate 6 albums over the course of 3 years. And although rumors were rampant about Polly and his questionable handling of the band's money, Polly managed to land a $3 million recording contract with Warner. The deal sounded pretty sweet, giving the band 12% of all retail and a $250,000 advance for each album produced. Their fourth album, titled Ass, did not fare particularly well, only making it to number 122 in Billboard, and with the ink barely dry, Into the Studio went to record number 5, self-titled for the band Badfinger. Neither album 4 nor 5 managed to create a successful single. The follow-up album, Wish You Were Here, was released in '74, and it was well received by the critics, but there was a problem. Warner Brothers had been trying to communicate with Polly regarding an escrow account for advance funds that the label and the band could mutually access, essentially asking, where was all that money that was supposed to be in those accounts? Polly refused to tell Warner where those accounts were or how to access them. If you recall, Warner agreed to pay the band in advance of $250,000 per album, so this was a sizable chunk of change that had gone missing. Polly continued to dodge inquiries, and as a result, in April 1974, Warner filed a publishing lawsuit against Polly and Badfinger and froze the promotion and distribution of Wish You Were Here. The band now started to fracture. Ham left the band, but with some arm twisting by Warner, came back a few weeks later. Next, guitarist Mullen quit at the end of '74 to pursue a solo career. And meanwhile, the band was still legally required to churn out albums for Warner Brothers, and they cranked out an album in 11 days called Head First, but because Warner's publishing arm had an ongoing lawsuit against Polly and the band, Warner would not accept the tapes. With their two most recent albums on ice, the band's futures were really put into question, and their career was frozen in legal suspension. In March 1975, the band's salary checks did not clear, and April's checks never even bothered to arrive, so Polly did nothing to assist the band. The band tried to book some gigs on their own, but all venues refused to book them because the contracts that they had signed with Polly, plus their well-known pending legal actions, no one wanted to touch them, and Polly was still avoiding all the calls. Ham in particular is having a tough time coping with financial issues as he had just purchased his first house and he and his girlfriend had a baby on the way. In April, Ham received a call with the shocking news that all his money had just disappeared. That night, he went with bass player Tom Evans to a pub where he went on a whiskey binge, and Evans drove him home around 3 a.m. And sometime later, 27-year-old Pete Ham hanged himself in his garage. In his suicide note to his girlfriend, he blamed much of the suicide on Polly. In the following month, Warner Brothers terminated its contract with Badfinger, and the band dissolved. The remaining band members went separate ways. Some continued to play music, some left music, some made a living doing a variety of jobs, including driving a taxi, insulating pipes, and laying carpet. In 1978, the lawsuit against Polly came to a close, requiring Polly to pay back a sizable chunk to Warner. That said, Polly was still able to pocket $100,000 in the end, while the band members got squat. And Polly was simultaneously under investigation for fraudulent bank dealings in California. In 1978, guitarist Mullen and bassist Evans reunited in a new band under the Elektra label, breathing life back into the Badfinger brand. The two recorded 2 albums between 78 and 81 that resulted in 2 songs making it into the top 100, which is modest success for a well-known band. So this lack of charting success saw Mullen and Evans split up and front their own bands, and both of them were using the Badfinger name, and the disasters just kept coming. Evans signed a management contract with John Cass, which resulted in a disastrous tour and spun into a $5 million lawsuit that settled in Cass's favor. Evans and his bandmates continued to try to make it work with the Badfinger name, but future demos failed to generate any interest. In November of 1983, Mullen and Evans had a steaming argument over Badfinger royalties held in escrow from the Apple years, as well as songwriting royalties from Without You that Evans was receiving. Mullen and others attached to the band wanted a piece of that lucrative pie. And after an argument, here we go again, Evans hanged himself in his garden. And last I heard, there are 2 members of one of the primary lineups of the original band, Joey Mullen and Bob Jackson, and both continue to tour with an emphasis on playing Badfinger music. This is undoubtedly the most distressing, depressing, and disturbing episode I've produced. However, I'm doing so in order to place an emphasis on how important it is to get the right people on your team. You have to do due diligence. You really want to make sure you do the following. Secure band members who are good. They're a good fit for you. They work well together. Recognize a band is a business, and make sure you treat it as such. You can still be a creative musician, and you can have a great time making music, but this is a business. Secure a manager who will work in your best interest. Don't just assume they're doing the right things. You really have to keep track of what they're up to. Secure an attorney who will work in your best interest. Same thing. Don't assume they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Secure a record label who will, at the very least, not treat you like dirt. Again, keep track of what they're up to. Watch your money like a hawk. You need to be aware of what's coming in, what's going out. There's no one that's going to do a better job of tracking your money than you. You earned it. So take care of it. As musicians, we're creatives, and many of us want to create music and leave the business side of things to others. Badfinger is a hugely cautionary tale of what happens when musicians take this lackadaisical and passive business approach. Being a musician is a business, and you have to keep up with the deals, the legalities, the money. This is your livelihood we're talking about here, so get educated into matters pertaining to the music industry and understand what deals are reasonable for musicians and what deals are scandalously abusive toward the performers. As you can see from the Badfinger saga, not understanding or tracking your money can lead you from selling over 1 million albums and headlining stadiums to installing carpet in LA. And don't let that happen to you. While there's more I could talk about as to why bands break up and why musicians leave bands, there's so much more to explore. So with that, we're going to put this mini-series in the rearview mirror and move on to less angst-heavy topics. I hope you return to check out the next episode of From A to Global Z, where we will explore a topic less distressing. I'm not sure exactly what that will be, but we'll wing it and see what happens. Until then, stay healthy and happy. Wishing you peace through music. I'm Bill Lord.